We're live. Welcome. Okay, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Moshiach class. Moshiach matters. And adjust this guy over here. All right. So there is not a regular sikha this week because, as we spoke about last week, the end of the Nun Bay sequence, 1992, ended with Parshas Vayakel. There was no sikha for Pekude, which is this week's parsha. But I didn't want to skip. Next week is going to be Vayikra, where we are starting over the entire Nun Aleph Nun Beis sequence, starting from the first sikha, which is from Vayikra, as we just mentioned. So I didn't want to skip this week. So there's a very special sikha. It's added on to the back of the book of Vayikra. There's a few sikhas that are not part of the Nun Aleph Nun Beis sequence, meaning they were not given in 1991 and 1992, the most recent talks we have from the Rebbe, but they are very connected to Mashiach and Geula, and therefore they're included in the books on Nun Aleph Nun Beis, and they're in the back as additions. And this particular sikha we're going to learn tonight, it's a short sikha, not as short as last week, but it's relatively short. And it was originally given on Beis Nisan, which is the Histalchus, the passing of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol neh b'vorei. On Parshat Tzav in Tafshin Mem Ches, which is 1988. And it's all about kingship. It's about referring specifically to Melech HaMashiach. And it's known that out of all the Rebbes, of course, our Rebbe being Melech HaMashiach is the most Malchus, the most Mashiach, makes sense of all the Rebbes. But outside of our Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, is known to be the most Malchustic, meaning the way he presented, the way he conducted himself in his leadership was very close to that of our Rebbe. He wrote extensive Maimarim. Actually, next Monday night is Beis Nisan. It is exactly a week from today, so our timing is not that far off. The Rebbe Rashab wrote over 2,000 Maimarim, which is mind-boggling, as well as the Hemshek Samit Vav and Ayin Beis, two of the deepest, most profound Hemsheks of Hasidic philosophy, and was an amazing, amazing leader. But let's get into the sikha, because we're going to learn about this concept of what it means to be a king. We see in today's day and age, we don't really have a king. Okay, count England, but it's not a real king. A Jewish king is different. A Jewish king is not given kingship because of his family members. It's based on the picking of God and the acceptance of his kingship by the people. And a true Jewish king like David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, they existed for the people. In other words, their entire goal, their entire modus operandi, the whole concept of their leadership had nothing to do with them. In fact, halachically, according to Jewish law, there's a limit on how many horses they can have, on how much money they can have. A Jewish king was not there to better himself or his family. The purpose of a Jewish king was 100% for the people. To spread goodness and kindness and protection and guide the people the way a king is supposed to be. So let's hop into the sikha and talk a little bit about this concept of what a king means in Judaism and the idea of a real king, of a true king. Okay, Aleph. Behemshek amadubar la'acharona oidois ha'inin l'techi yitain El Libo. And a continuation as what has been stated and recently stated, and that the living shall take heart. We shall take heart of the living. What does this mean? Move on. Shekal ta'arich she'ira bo inin miyuchad b'chayach adam. We can understand this from all the matters that occurred in the life of a person. Shechazor v'nishna midei shana b'shana, and that returns this energy every single year. And it's necessary, therefore, to add on to this person's life. We said above. Benoga yom holedet. This refers to the birthday of a human being, as well as the day of their leadership, that they took over as king, as leader. It's known that a Rebbe takes over by giving a Hasidic mimer. And when the previous Rebbe, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad passed on Beis Nisan, his successor, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, took over as Rebbe on that day, on Beis Nisan. And so the Rebbe is saying that the day of someone's taking over as Nasi, as leader, is also important, like a birthday or a day of passing, and it shows the emphasis of that person's mission and his lifelong work as a leader. Be'im hadvarim oimrim v'noga l'chayav pratim ka'echad mechad Israel, and this applies to every single one of the Jewish people. But Noga l'Nasi Yisrael, and how much more so to the leader of the Jewish people. Allah has come of a kama she'orois hayuchudim v'chayeihem mavim hoispa be'inin hachaim. How much more so is it important to add on to the life and the accomplishments of a leader of all the Jewish people? Hein b'noga la'anasian atzmam, as they're connected to his leadership himself. And also as it's connected to the influence that they had upon all the Jewish people and continue to have upon all the Jewish people. So on Ma'arisim, the sheep of their flock, the leader Moshe Rabbeinu was referred to as Re'ah Mehem, the faithful shepherd. And that is what one of the terms that's given to our leaders as faithful shepherds, and the Jewish people are likened to their flock. And this applies in our situation where we're talking about Beis Nisan, which is the day of Histachus, the day of the going up of the soul of the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, the Rebbe Rashab. And the beginning of the leadership of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe. And therefore this day, Beis Nisan, which again is a week from today, is a very unique day for the life of the leader of the generation. And we see this specifically as it applies to the leader of their generation. Where his leadership will continue on until the days of the redemption of Moshiach. And according to this, we can understand that on Beis Nisan of every year, we must add on to the matter of his leadership, of his Nesias. Okay, Beis. What's going on, Dov? Welcome. I remember the first time I learned the Sikh, I was blown away that people were actually, unfortunately, Lubavitchers were actually out there yelling at people and throwing them out of a shul for saying Yehi Adonenu. When you learn the Sikha, and it says the importance of saying these words. But let's continue on. Base. So this concept of the living shall take this to heart, and adding on to the life of one We're going to talk about it now in our situation. Oides nisi v'melech. First, we have to understand the concept of a nasi, of a melech, of a leader, of a king, referring to the leader of the Jewish people. It's known and it's brought down in many places in Chassidus, in Parshas Shoftim and Nun Aleph, and Parshas Beit Rabbeinu Shebbavel and Nun Beis, amongst other places, where in every generation we have a Nasi Dorenu, right? The idea of a Rebbe. A Rebbe is an acronym, Resh Beis Yud, which stands for Rosh Bnei Yisrael, the head of the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu, that's how we get the concept of a Rebbe. He was our first Rebbe. Rabbeinu means our Rebbe. So Moshe was our Rebbe. He was the first Rebbe. Of course, our most recent Rebbe, our Rebbe, is it says Moshe was the first Redeemer, and our Rebbe is the last Redeemer, meaning Mashiach and Moshe are connected. That the idea in every generation, there are a lot of learned rabbis, a lot of leaders, a lot of Torah scholars, but there's only one Rebbe. There's only one Moshe in every generation. And that Rebbe is what we call as the Nasi Hador, the leader or the prince or the president of the generation. And as we started saying, the Nasi Hador is also what is known as the Melech, the king of the generation. Just like a king rules over the nation, the Nasi rules over the nation. So in every generation, there's only one Nasi who happens to be the same Melech. And as the Rebbe said, if the generation merits, then he becomes Melech HaMashiach and redeems us, which is what is going on right now in our generation with our Rebbe. But so just to understand this concept of a Nasi and a Rebbe, it is one and the same, and a Melech and a king. Poisek HaRambam, as the Rambam says, Shu Leiv Kol Kahal Yisrael. One of the characteristics or what's the word I'm looking for? One of the qualifications, that one of the things that represents the leader of the generation, the Mashiach of the generation, is he is the hearts of the entire congregation of the Jewish people. That's one of the identifying factors of the Nasi and king of the generation. He's the heart of the whole generation. Mishkan Hadam hu hanefesh. Mechaya es kol haguf. And the job, in a simplified sense, of the hearts, the heart being arguably the most important organ. Some say it was the brain, but Shem Rachamim, no one should know, but someone could be brain dead and still be alive. They keep them alive on a machine, but you can't be heart dead and still be alive. The hearts, that's game over. So the hearts is responsible for pumping blood to the entire body, throughout the whole soul. And this gives life to the whole body. Right, the blood, the heart, basically the way a heart works is right, ba-boom, ba-boom. It pumps out blood and it pulls blood back in, and that cycles throughout your whole entire body. But pratis yoser, more specifically, melech, which is the Hebrew letters of mem, lamed, chetz, represents another Rashi Tevis, another acronym referred to moach, lev, kaved. Moach is, and the Rebbe says now, talat shaltin enun, moach, libo, v'kavda. These are the three rulers over the body. It's known, I'm teaching Sefer Yetzirah right now to the center girls on Wednesday night. It's also broadcast live here, and also recorded. I encourage everyone to watch it if you are not. It's amazingly very deep into all the secrets of creation, and we're getting really deep and applying it to our own personal lives. And we're learning about this concept that the human body and the sefirot are divided into three sections. So the way the sefirot are aligned, you could differentiate them in two different ways: top to bottom or right to left. Right to left, there's three columns. There's right, left, and middle. Top to bottom, there's top, middle, and bottom. So in the array of top, middle to bottom, which is represented by the head, which is basically the mochin, chabad, which is the intellect, and then you have the middle sfirot, which is chesed, gavor, and tiferes, which represent the emotions, and then you have netzach, hod, and yisod, which represent the action or the lower part of the body. Each one of those groupings are ruled over by one of the main organs. So the head rules over the upper part, the heart rules over the middle, and the liver rules over the lower half. These are the three rulers in every body. And now we're going to talk about them briefly. What is the difference? Hamoach, or the brain, or the upper ruler. Hu harosh the chayos aguf. This is the head that gives the life to the body. Ikar mishkana yesharasa shaganashamahi b'moichai shagadam. Excuse me. That the main part of the soul, the ikar part of the soul, our soul is throughout our whole body. But we know that the main part of our soul is focused in our brain. And from there, it shoots out and rules over to the whole rest of the body. V'kol, and all the limbs. V'kol evra mekabel mimeno chayos v'koach erui lo defi mizgo v'kasonoisei. V'lochein hamoach mushov mushlet al ivrei haguf v'hanihigim k'retzoinoi. Okay, so it says like this, that all the limbs of the body receive their energy, their power, the aspect of their soul that is fitting to each one, that is fitting for each one. And the brain, therefore, controls over all the limbs of the body and guides them in their conduct. What does that mean? It means right now I'm going to grab this water, right? So when I grab the water without explaining it to you, normally you don't think about that, right? You don't have to say brain unless you're really stoned, right? Brain, pick up cup of water. No, like people don't usually do that if they're normal. What happens is you're thirsty, you grab the cup, you start drinking. It happens in an instant. But what's happening is that your arm, when it's reaching for this cup of water or whatever it's doing, the brain is shooting, firing like messaging neurons, whatever you want to call it. I'm not getting into the whole technical thing with the nervous system, they're channeling, but the long story short is that each part of your body has a particular energy that is capable of performing that, right? The hands, they move because the hands are meant to move, but it's the soul, it's the energy that goes into the hands that directs them to move. The hand knows how to move automatically once the soul directs that energy into the hand. So this all stems in from the brain, that the functionality of each different organ and its movements and its function fitting for that particular organ. Then we have the Rebbe hops to the lowest part, and interesting enough, he does not discuss it, he does not elaborate on it. Akaved kulo dam. Basically the liver, where the blood congeals, where the blood kind of just like hangs out there and does what it needs to do and to spread to the lower part of the body. The Rebbe does not elaborate on that, because generally speaking, it's dealing with the lower part of our being. Anyhow, let's move on. Now we're dealing with the heart, ve'ilu halev, which is the middle. Hu chayos haguf atzmai, and this is the life force of the body itself. Because we know that the blood is the root of the soul, so to speak, the lowest part of the soul. The nefesh is actually in our blood. And through the heart, it is responsible for pumping the blood and giving the life force throughout the whole body. And it encloses in the blood the soul, and therefore from the heart it shoots out to all the different limbs. And what's going on? The heart is surrounded with this blood, and it pumps it around to the whole body and to all the limbs and all the organs, and it circulates and comes back to the heart. And this process continues. In fact, the Alter Rebbe explains in Lamed Beis of the Tanya, which is the heart of the Tanya, which is a beautiful, beautiful explanation of what's going on, that often sickness, physical sickness, is a direct result of a soul sickness. And what happens in the root of a lot of times of a sickness is a particular body part is not doing well, because that body part is acting what we would call selfishly, meaning without realizing it. And there's deep um, issues going on in a deeper level of the soul that's causing this. It's not like someone's functionally saying, like someone saying like to the liver, hey, hold on to the blood over here. That's not what happens. But a particular body part that is not functioning properly, when the blood comes into that body part, what it's supposed to do is get the blood that it needs and push it onto the next organ, and it flows. But when that particular body part, for whatever reason, is not working properly, it holds on to the blood longer than it should, excuse me. And it becomes like a selfishness that it feels good with that blood, right? It's like, and it doesn't pass it on. There's no rotation. So what happens is all that blood kind of backs up in that organ and causes the organ to not to function properly. And of course, the Jewish people are likened also to these limbs that are connected to the heart, to the leader of the generation. Again, showing the importance of how important is in our lives to care about and help others and not just be self-focused, because then you become sick and all of the Jewish people become sick together, because we're one body, one soul, one nation. So the idea is we're all each individually meant to take the life force that God gives us and obviously take care of our families and ourselves and our homes, but to make sure that we're pushing it on, we're paying it forward, and therefore we act as a conduit and not a blockage for the energy, so that it shall flow. And the main life force of all the bodies and all the limbs of the body are connected through the heart. Because it's the heart that really spreads forth the life force or the blood to all the limbs of the body. And furthermore, life is connected to movements. Moving. I tell my father he should live and be well. He's turning 80 next month. And it's, you got to keep moving, Dad. You got to exercise. You got to walk, right? Like when older people tend to get sedentary, that's when, God forbid, disease starts to happen, because you're sitting in one place. If you want to grow, you have to keep moving, spiritually, physically, mentally, in any capacity in a relationship. You can't stay stagnant. We're not meant to stay still. So when we stagnate, that's when things start going wrong. So life is connected to movement, constant movement. And the main movement in the body originates from the heart. And the blood or the heart pumps out continuous movement of what we call ratzo v'shov, tefiko v'liba, v'dam shabo b'tanua tamidis, sivoiv v'hoylech v'kol ivri haguf, ma'she'en ken kaved v'moach she'eno b'tanua. So what happens is ratzo v'shov is the idea of going and returning, right? That's how, as a likened example, our divine service is meant to be. Our goal is to constantly our soul should want to leave our body. In an ideal situation, we should have such love and rapture for God. The Rambam says, how do you increase your love of God? By increasing your knowledge of God. How do you increase your knowledge of God? By learning Torah. There's no other way to do it, right? How do you increase your knowledge of science? Well, you learn science, right? How do you increase your knowledge of God? You got to learn Torah. So the more you learn, the greater your knowledge of God becomes and your appreciation of God, and the more your heart opens up and the more love you have for God. Why is that important to have love for God? Because God's love for each one of us is unconditional and unlimited. The question is whether we have the capacity to receive it. So God is a mirror. The more we have love for God, the more God's love we're able to take in. It's not that God says, oh, you love me, now I love you back. It's an automatic process of Ein Sof, meaning God's energy is constantly flowing to us all the time. The question is whether or not we're capable of receiving it. And the idea is the more we open up our heart and give room for love for God, the more that energy can come back to us. So this concept of going and returning, of movement, is mainly focused in the heart. The brain, we know, is cold. Under a microscope, I'm sure you could sense movements, but generally speaking, there's not much movement going on in the brain or in the liver. The liver again is where the blood congeals, where it sits still. So it's really, out of all these three rulers, kings over the body, it's the heart that where most of the action takes place. Excuse me. V'Nasiya v'Melech, Lev Kol Yisrael. And as we said before, the leader, the king of the nation, is the heart of all the congregation of the Jewish people. Asher Yotziim va'asher Yovuim. He's responsible for sending out energy to the Jewish people and for bringing it back in. It's through the leader of the generation that the life force goes out and spreads out to all the Jewish people. And like the day that he began his Nesias, his kingship, it increases every single year. And therefore, the idea of the heart, just like it is the life force of the life, and the living should take it to heart. That it's not just the spiritual life, but the physical life. Right? We spoke about this often. The way God channels his energy into the world is like through a pyramid. It goes through the leader of the generation, one person, the Moshe of the generation. From him, those who are closest to him, those who are doing the most to emulate and follow his instructions, right? Just like a general, the closest to the general, the one who are carrying out his orders the most precise way. And then from there, it travels all the way down to the rest of the Jewish people, to the nations of the world, to the animals, to the plants, the inanimate objects, and all the energy flows down. So the closer you are to the pipe, to the leader of the generation, to the king of the generation, the more enlivened you are by him. And the idea is that's the way the energy spreads out, and therefore it says Nasi hu hakol. The leader and the nation are literally one. You can't have a separation. You can't have a body without a head or a head without a body. So just like the leader pumps this energy into the whole nation, he also brings it back, right? There's many stories. Sometime, I forgot who it was. It was a well-known rabbi went to the Rebbe and said to the Rebbe, how's the Rebbe doing? The Rebbe said, ask my Hasidim, because however my Hasidim doing is how I'm doing, because it's a flow. If anyone's ever been or had the schus to be in 770 with the Rebbe during his Farbringen, or have watched the videos of the Rebbe Farbringen in 770, you'll see an amazing thing. A niggin will start, and then it's like a wave. Like the Rebbe will start the niggin, and then all of a sudden, like the energy flows to the congregation, and then they start singing, then it comes back to the Rebbe. And that's the idea, just like a heart pumping the blood out and in. Gimel, Amor le'el, as we said above, Mudgash b'Yosher b'Beis Nisan Hashana Zu, Samech Hes Shana, the Nasias Kaveh Kadoshim Avrahad Ve'adma Nasi Derenu, Samech Hes b'Gematria Chaim. So the Rebbe said, all this applies particularly to that year, which was the 68th year of the Frierdiker Rebbe's since he became Nasi, and 68 is Gematria of Chaim, of life. Yesh lahoisif alpi sigonon l'videi bar ha'admor al derek harem shemispar sameches ha'ola mitziruf oisis d'chaim kevan haluki yitkafos b'memshech sameches shanoit anesiya nasi d'reinu. So now we're talking about this life, this concept of life of the leader of the generation. The Rebbe always referred to himself as a continuation of the Frierdiker Rebbe's leadership, always. Nisbar b'makom achor 30 shanos nasios shel kaveh kadoshim armor chaim hayos va'amedin nilachos v'gimel to kofosha aser shanim. And the Rebbe said, and we look at the first 30 years of the Frierdiker Rebbe's leadership, which took him up to the Rebbe taking over, basically. He said they're divided into 3 distinct periods, each one of 10 years. We have the first 10 years, Medina Hahi, Eser Shanim Shenois, Medina's Polin. The first 10 years were in Russia, the second 10 years in Poland, and the third 10-year period of the Frierdiker Rebbe's leadership before the Rebbe took over in America. Went from Russia to Poland to America. And we see this concept of two yuds in the word Chaim. Rumzin, the Eser Arishain, Vesheni Hanisuis. And these are hinted on the 10 first and second decades of his leadership. Oisios Memches, Chaim, Rumez Lamerches, excuse me, and Ler Memches, excuse me, referring to the section of his leadership, the first one, Eser Shanim Chaim Ba'amedin, and then Lamerches Shanim, the Paul and Nimshachas, Vispah Chutzeba, Torah Mitzvahs, Bakal Munas, and Bakal Hapit, Darche Asha Arena. So again, just dividing it up into his leadership, into the different journeys of where that leadership went from Russia to Poland to America in the times. Le'ir shemem ches begamatria chay, begamatria beis pamim chaf dalit. So the Rebbe is saying now mem ches is the gematria of chayil or soldier, and it's 2 times of 24, which is the Indian of a samati kadech gad shamastichich, and I will set your window frames with rubies. I know it's a pasuk from Yeshayahu. Come aboard the Indian kadekayad, the Kuti Torah, v'chein bedrusha chatzam etzerek v'al derek zeh v'nogel achayil, v'chein chayim, referring to a chayil or a soldier and life, making an equivalent. Sheninim ela nizbaro bedrusha chasidus v'lochim nikolatoi v'sefer hakloitim the rush the tzam etzerek. והם גם יסוד הדרושי רבסנו נשיא לאחר זה עד כמה קדוש אדמי נשיא דרנו אשר עידהו אין במקוים אלא תויסף ביור המים לאל על דרכי אלוהים מיוחד שנה זו אחרת תן לכם okay, just talking about a particular pasuk that was discussed by the different Rebbeim leading up to our times. Okay, Dalit. Now we're going to talk about this concept of a king a little bit deeper. First of all, the relationship between the Nasi and king, the leader, and the nation is in 2 levels. Mechad Gisa, one way. Tenua sha roimemois v'havdala. The first is the concept that the leader of the generation is infinitely exalted and higher and separated from anyone else in the generation. He's in a league of his own. And this is a difficult concept for a lot of non-Hasidim, especially non-Lubavitchers, to grasp. Because people would look at the Rebbe and say, oh yeah, sure, he was a Talmid Chacham. Oh yeah, he was a good leader. They don't understand this concept that a Rebbe is nothing at all like anyone else in the generation. Again, you have rabbis, you have Talmid Chachamim, you have leaders of shuls, of communities, of states, you have leaders of countries, but there's only one leader of an entire generation. And he's a king. And the king is exalted beyond a level beyond anyone else. Not because he's a genius in the Torah, because he is. Not because he knows more Torah than anyone else, more knowledge than anyone else, all of those things. But it's because of who he is. Because he's appointed as the king. He's the king, and therefore the rest of the generation, even the biggest Talmid Chacham, are over here, and the king is Roy Memois. It said he's exalted and completely removed from the rest of the nation, the rest of the generation. Removed, much higher. Shehem devarim nifradim v'zarim v'rechukim mamalas hamelech kamud gash be'inin hayira'a v'hibito sum tasim alecha melech Just putting this on vibrate because it's ringing in my ear. Shitahei imemot elecha. And it says, you should place a king upon you, above you. And the idea is that you're supposed to completely nullify yourself to the king. It's a real king. It's a concept of, whoa, you're the king and I'm a member of the nation. Regardless of of where you're holding yourself in the nation, you're still a member of the nation. Versus the king is infinitely above the rest of the generation. That's one way of looking at the king's relationship to the nation. If I hit, sometimes I press buttons. Hold on one second here. I've got all these gadgets now, this microphone, and I'm accidentally pressing buttons, and I don't know if I'm shutting things off, putting things on. Last week in the Center Girls class for the Sefer Yetzirah, the Kabbalah class, I was like 15 minutes into it, and I realized I wasn't recording. Anyways, okay. So the second relationship is Tachlis Hakiroiv. Kamaima Shamelchu Lev Kal Kal Yisrael V'Hari Ein Lecha Kiroiv Gadol Yoshem Mikroiv Halev the Ivrei Haguf. And the second is, and this is such an amazing thing, is the king is close like this to every single person in the nation. It says because the heart can't get much closer than the organs that it's pumping blood to. And therefore, it's the ultimate closest to the body. Look how close the heart is to the rest of our body, right? It's right there. So on one hand, the king is exalted and lifted above the whole generation. On the other hand, he's this close and intimately aware and connected to every one of us. It's an amazing concept to think about. How someone can be that exalted and far removed and holier than everyone else, and yet intimately close and involved to every single one in the same idea. How can it be? Because this is a godly person, right? Stories, there's thousands of stories of people who went by the Rebbe and then went by 20 years later after the Rebbe seeing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And the Rebbe asking him about every family member. What happens on this one's birthday? Did you finish this? And the person's like, how does he know this? I met him once 20 years ago, and he knows every detail of my life and my whole family. This is the idea. This is not a normal leader. Normal leaders have no idea who they meet. 10 minutes later, they meet so many people, they don't even know who they are. You're talking about someone who's infinitely above and yet intimately close to every single one of the generation. That since the heart itself finds itself continuously connected to the organs, because the heart is the one who's pumping blood and life force to all the limbs of the body. And it's a continuous, ongoing process. And every one of the organs are close and connected in a state of complete oneness and receive the life force, from the heart. So again, we have two opposite realities coexisting all the time. It's a godly concept. This is not a human concept. There's no human way to explain how the leader of the generation is infinitely close to every person in the generation, yet infinitely removed at the same time. Yisur Mizeh, explain it even more. Hakiru sheben hamelech la'am hu lo rak b'yachas lahamshachas hachayis dekol ha'am. And the closest between the king and the nation is not only in its relationship of drawing down and giving life force to the nation, and the receiving of the life force from the king. And the gam the Eider Gisa, shemetziyoisei shel hamelech tildui ha'am. In melech bliam. Very powerful words. So the relationship and the closeness between the king and the nation is not just the fact that the king is giving the life force and the energy and the blood, just like the heart, to the whole entire nation, or the fact that the nation is receiving that energy and life force from the king. But the existence of the king is dependent upon the nation, because there's no king without a nation. Very, very powerful. The Rebbe has said, I don't remember what Sikha off the top of my head, but in Nun base, that God has already chosen his servant David Melech. God has already anointed our King Mashiach. The only thing that remains is the acceptance of his kingship by the people, because you can't have a king without a nation. A Jewish king is not a dictator. He is not someone who forces his will on others. A Jewish king is appointed by God, but needs to be accepted by the people. In fact, David HaMelech, King David, spent 7 years in Hebron before he actually became king of all the Jewish people, because he had not been accepted yet by the Jewish people. And that's the sequence we're in now. We're in a period where we're waiting for the acceptance of the Rebbe's kingship, which is a very challenging thing right now, considering that the majority of our friends with black hats and wear 2 pair of tefillin are doing everything possible to not talk about the Rebbe being Melech HaMashiach, or the king. So how we get this message out there, I don't know. We're trying, but people have taken huge Kabbalah Samelech. They've taken upon themselves. The women do it quite often. There've been forums sent around, people accepting the kingship of the Rebbe, but it has not reached the level of permeating into the world as it needs to be. How we do that, again, that's I don't know. I wish I did. I say all the time, money in this world solves a lot of problems. Olam Hazeh is about time and money. So saying it publicly again, God, bring me $1 billion and I'll bring you Mashiach. Put it that way. Because you can hire lots of people and lots of really smart people who own very large advertising and marketing companies, and they can figure out how to do this. But requires this. Anyways, it's beyond the scope of this evening, but the idea is that the king's kingship is dependent upon the nation, because you do not have a king without a nation. In other words, afal pi shenikra am lashon amamot rechokim memeles hamelech. The idea of what makes a king is, which is why it's important not just for the Jewish people to accept the Rebbe as king, but for the non-Jews as well, because those closest to the king, it's challenging for the king's kingship to really have its effect on them. What really makes a king is that he's a king over not only those who are close to him, but those who are far away. Everyone, they all come under the auspices and connection of the king. This is emphasized also on the crowning of the king, of his the crowning is coronation. By coronating the king, by crowning the king, this is one of the ways of accepting the king. How do you accept a king? By coronating him, by saying, "This is my king. Yes, I accept him as my king." Sha'am kamarizim. So how do you coronate the king? The Rebbe says, by the nation proclaiming Yehi Hamelech. The king lives. This is the same words that were said on the kingship of Beis David, right? When they said openly, Yehi Hamelech David, King David lives. In other words, this concept of saying Yehi Hamelech did not derived from the Lubavitchers. This was not a Chabad thing for our Rebbe. This was saying back to the days of David HaMelech. And therefore the Rebbe says, that this emphasizes, by proclaiming the words Yehi, it emphasizes in actuality how the nation is giving life to the king. And this is the importance, because when you give life to the king gives life to you. Just this concept about when you increase your love of God, God's love of you increases. When you say, Yehi Hamelech, I want you to be my king, guess what happens? He says, I'll be your king. And what does that mean? It means that the king will rule over your head, your heart, and your lower parts, right? Yehi lives. Adonenu is the lower part. Master. Morenu, heart, teacher. The Rabbeinu, Rebbe, head, intellect. Melech, king. Mashiach, Mashiach, forever and ever. Meaning I'm handing over. We just came out of the holiday of Purim and the Megillat Esther. What happened? The king, if you saw my my Purim for bringing, I get into details about how every one of these characters in Purim represent a different aspect of ourselves, and the whole entire Megillat Esther is a battle inside of us for our godly soul to take control over our physical body instead of our animal soul. But want to go look over there, you could watch the Farbrengen. But the idea is when King Achashverosh gives half of the kingship to Esther, what does she do? What does she do? The first thing, she puts Mordechai in charge of it because she's saying he's the king. In other words, you can't reach this level of malchus in yourself, of rulership over your body on your own. You need a king for it. It says when you enter into the land of Israel, we have 3 mitzvahs. I don't know why I'm slurring my words today. We have 3 mitzvahs that we're obligated to. Number 1, appoint a king. Number 2, destroy a malach. Number 3, build a Beis Hamikdash. You can't destroy a malach inside of you without appointing a king. Where does a malach live? In these 3 places: head, heart, lower part. Right? These are the 3 doubts a malach puts inside of us: doubt of God, doubt of self, doubt of mission. So when you're proclaiming Yechi Adonenu Moreinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach, King Mashiach, you're saying to the Rebbe, I want you to take over my head, my heart, and my lower. I don't want a Malach to be in charge. I don't want my eye. I know that God can operate this system better than I can. And this is called bittul. This is called submitting yourself to the will of the king. Hey, talking about the life force of the leader of the generation. לכל אנשי הדור על ידי הנשיא הדור, הרי גם אנשי הדור פועלים הספק בעניין חיים של אצל הנשיא הדור. And the Rebbe said, again, emphasize, so how did the king gives life to all the people in the generation? And how do the people of the generation give life to the king back? By adding on to his life. How do we do that? More as we said above, by proclaiming Yehi HaMelech. You understand, every time you say Yechi, every time you sing Yechi, every time you say the words Yechi HaMelech, you are giving life. You're waking up the king. You're causing the king to come to life. Now imagine what happens when you're saying that he's not alive, what you're doing to the king. The Achrish Ishna Hashleimus Tachaim Shana Lenisias Hanasi Doreno Tark Lisbaha Ikris Bein Hachaim Aide Pulas Mikuriz Ichiamelech. I'm going to move a little bit fast now, even though we still have plenty of time. I took a long time to bring through the first part of it because there's a lot of deep stuff there. But anyways, moving along. So also, what do we say? That the completion of the life every single year to add on to the leadership of the leader of the generation and adding on to his life through the nation proclaiming, Yechi HaMelech, the Rebbe said it again. It's the 3rd time he mentioned this. And by proclaiming and announcing Yechi HaMelech, it brings closer to the time where the dead will arise and dance in the dust. Including David HaMelech, says that in Tchiyat HaMesim, in the rising of the dead, that's going to be a freaky day. Could you imagine what that's going to look like? Anyways, it says the righteous will come up first. The most righteous will arise first. So when you proclaim Yechi HaMelech, you're giving life to not only to King Mashiach and to the king, but you're causing this concept of Tchiyat HaMesim, and you're beginning the process of waking up all the righteous in previous generations and giving life to everyone. And it's important that we make a lot of noise and proclaim Ad Masai, screaming out to God, Ad Masai, until when? The last thing we want to do is get comfortable in the gullus. No matter what's going on in our lives, no matter how our lives appear to be doing good, and Baruch Hashem, they should all be doing good for all of us all the time. Nevertheless, why is my thing stuck here? We keep finding ourselves in a situation where the Jewish people, unfortunately, are going through some hardships right now, to say the least, especially our brothers and sisters in Israel. Hashem should protect them and watch over them and avenge our blood. And the idea is that we have to constantly scream out to God for Mashiach. Whether our lives are doing good or not so good, it doesn't make a difference. We're all in this together, and we need to feel the pain for our brothers and sisters in Israel. Anyone who's ever spent some time, like I have in Israel, will feel the pain of seeing some of the things you see over there. But the important thing is we have to yell out Ad Maseh. We have to scream out to God until when? In other words, okay, yeah, I've got my car and I've got my house and whatever. I've got, my bonus check coming and things are good and whatever. We can never get short-sighted and think that life is just, it's just pretty good. We always have to be screaming out. And in fact, it's known in Jerusalem and in a lot of places in Israel, when people build homes, they leave one little place unfinished, a broken stone, a little hole. It's not that they ran out of money. It's the idea is that it's to remember that until we have the third base of Migdash, something is missing. We need to feel that pain. We need to scream out Ad Masai as much as possible and demand that God brings redemption. Yesh Lamar, Shenoisef, Al Hedgasha Atzvia, Bekasha V'Risha Al Hageula. יש בהכרזה זו גם בתוכן העניין הקרסה יהי המלך שעל ידי פועלים מיוחד דוד מלך המשיחה. That also by screaming out Ad Masai, it goes together with Yehi Melech. This idea of demanding and wanting Mashiach and saying Yehi Melech and Ad Masai is giving more life and bringing Mashiach sooner. Because we're telling to God, we want a real king. Yes, okay. President Trump is doing a good job in America. But we want a king. The Jewish people need a king who's looking out for our interests. The whole world needs a real king, a real leader. And therefore, we're screaming, Ad Masai, how long until you bring us our Redeemer, God? Vav. In addition to this, that King Mashiach has emphasized even more the connection to every one of the Jewish people. And therefore, the power and the ability of every single one of us to yell out and demand, Yechia Melech, long live the king. Even in the pasuk where it says, "And a star shall shoot forth from Yaakov," Mitzino based Chazal rabbis teach us there's two interpretations of this. Aleph, Kochav Kai Al Kol Echad Mechad Israel. The stars are referring to every one of the Jewish people. And the second explanation, Kochav Kai Al Melech HaMashiach, is referring to King Mashiach. Because keep in mind, I'm just going to say it now. Sometimes I jump ahead because in my unconscious mind, I remember the Sikha, and then I start saying it before I get to it. So let me see it, read inside. And there's no contradiction between these two statements, that one is referring to Mashiach and one is referring to every one of the Jewish people. How you do it? Because it's known that every one of us has a spark of the soul of Mashiach. And this is the level of the Yechida, the fifth level of our soul. This is such a deep and profound concept, and it is so important that one of the functions of Mashiach is he is what is called as the Yechida Klalit, the general Yechida of all the Jewish people. The fifth level of all of our souls is connected to Melech HaMashiach, is connected directly to God. So we have a spark of Mashiach inside every single one of us. So when we're saying, Yechia Melech, long live the king, we're giving life to the general Yechida. We're giving life to Mashiach himself. And it's also giving life to the Mashiach inside of us. In other words, the more we focus on bringing redemption to the world, the more and closer we get to bring redemption to ourselves, and vice versa. The more we work on bringing redemption to ourselves, our individual redemption from fulfilling our divine purpose and coming into this world, the more we bring that general redemption to the world, right? Everything is a micro and a macrocosm. The Nimsar comes out from this Banuga, the Melech HaMashiach Mudgash, but Yoiser HaKash of call Israel. And it shows how much more so how Mashiach is connected to every single one of the Jewish people. From the essence of our souls. The level of the Yechida. He needs Mashiach, which is the level of the soul of Mashiach. And therefore, when we say there's no king without a nation, and how do we have that? The Rebbe says again, I didn't count, but I think we've already up to 7 or 8 times he said these things. And how do we pronounce the king, proclaim the king? By announcing Yechia Melech, long live the king. And this emphasizes the concept of Mashiach, that a star will come forth from Yaakov. The Kalos Yisrael, and it also emphasizes the idea that it's talking about all the Jewish people. Because every time we bring life to Melech HaMashiach, he brings life to Mashiach inside of us. And the spark of Mashiach awakens inside of us. It's an unbelievable concept. Zion. We see a special connection to the month of Nisan. We know that Nisan is connected to redemption. As our rabbis teach us, שבו נגאלו ישראל ממצרים ובו אסירים לגאולה. שנאמר כי מצרים מארץ מצרים ראינו נפלאות. Just like when God took us out of, he chose Nisan to be the first month of the year. Even though we count the years by Tishrei, the months are counted by Nisan. And God redeemed us from Egypt in the month of, I can't figure out what's going because I'm shaking the table. God redeemed us from Egypt in the month of Nisan, and it says he will once again redeem us from our exile in the month of Nisan. So we see the month of Nisan is very much connected to redemption. B'chodesh Nisan kashor im gam im inyan hanisuis. Ba'av b'Nisan, ba'araf b'Nisan, tchilas hanisir hakriv es hakarvoisem lahanuchas hamizbeach nasi achad leyoim shlochenu hagim. Excuse me. Person says that in the month of Nisan is very much connected to this concept of leaders or rulers. We know starting in the first of Nisan, the first 13 days of Nisan, we have a special portion of the Nasi, we say, for the individual Nasi of that day. And it's also connected to the full redemption of Mashiach in the future. Yes. But Pratius Yoiser Beis Nisan Bayom Hasheni Kariv Nistano Ben Seor Nasi Yisachar. And the second of Nisan is connected to the leader of Yisachar. Seor, that's his name. Hu Gam Meloshin Sa'ar. Asher had Sa'ar Hachi Gadol Hu Sa'ar Galad. Sa'ar is referring to like the bitterness of the exile. The Achrid Sa'ar HaGadus, and after the bitterness of the exile, skipping the brackets. Nolad, so or a scar of Nolad Mizgala. Aide had Sa'ar, the font Sa'ar Agra. Below Rak Agra, Kavar the Fayat Atzmo Labora Ella Yisira Mazab, Boifensha Metzia, Metzatsi David Avdi. That just like there will be bitterness, there will be joy, which is the opposite of the bitterness. And it's also referring to that I found my servant David. Rumaz gam b'shem Natanel. She said, "Sa'ar hagodas." Well, Natanel. That it's also referring to. We said the full name of the second Nasi on Beis Nisan, which is Natanel ben Sa'ar. We already talk about Sa'ar. Natanel is for Natan El, which is giving El of God. Notain. Call Natain, but ayin yafet hu notain. That everyone should give with a good eye. The Rebbe is just dissecting Beis Nisan and the Nasi of that day. Not only that, but in the way of Kel, of God's name. Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, referring to the 13 attributes of mercy, referring to the revealing and drawing down of God's kindness into us in the world. The kindness that is above the normal chain of creation. And the ultimate kindness that God will bestow upon us with the redemption and the revealing of Mashiach. Test. And also there's a connected to the third of Nisan, the leader of the tribe of Zevulun. החילוק שבין יששכר וזבולון הוא שמח לזבולון, בצאצא ויששכר בכל-לך. היינו ששכר הניני לעיני בר התורה. We know that the connection between Zvulun and Yisachar, one learns Torah, the other supports them, and they both benefit from one another. כמו שלו הבנה יששכר וידע בעיני לעשידים, לעתים, Zvulun עיקר עניין יציאה, that Zvulun went out into the fields and worked, Yisachar stayed in the tents and learned Torah, as we said, and they each benefit one another. The dugma say Torah gufa hechuluk shebein leimer Torah bisman hazeh lagabi leimer Torah lasid vo to all that dugma hechuluk sheben kavias asid in the Torah lagabi Torah amunas, so that the new Torah in the future to come will be completely elevated to much higher than the Torah we're learning now. Valpizeh muvan hakasher v'hamshech the Yisachar the Zevulun b'noger the Inyan the Geuda. שלאחר מהגולה רואים שמסינו ורסינו בלימוד התורה בזמן הזה ובכנס נבולון לגבי בלימוד התורה דסידבו. Okay, and also all our good deeds in the future to come will be revealed with Mashiach. Yud ובכל זה נתייסה בקביע שנה זו, and how much more so does this all apply in our year right now. He attain all the bo בנוגע לחי יום ועד למעשה בפועל שבייס ניסן Hal b'yom rishon the Parshas Tzav. That year it fell on Parshas Tzav and it was the first day of the week. Tchilas Parshas Tzav Mefarish Rashi Ein Tzav Ela Lashon Zeros Miyad L'Doros, talking about the moving quickly. Shebezeh Mudgash B'Kol Amor the El Oidoyse Inin HaGeula V'Nasio is the David Malcham Mashiach Tzarkos Boyfriend Shel Zeros. That we must focus on bringing the redemption now. We can't just say, okay, whenever Mashiach comes, he'll come. But Pashtus, what does it mean? We find ourselves in the month of Nisan, the month of the redemption. The Nisan, the Yom HaMaaseh, Beis Nisan. And now we're entering into the actual work of the month of Nisan. Bo Melech HaMashiach, Yechia Melech, that speedily Mashiach will come right now. Yud Aleph. Yesh lahisip b'leimer hora'ah ba'avodas ha'adam l'kanoi. Binin hazrius ein sav ela lashon zrius. Teichen ha'parsha sha'aydi namad sabes aharoi. Ein sav ela lashon zrius. Hu benoiga the Torah chadash. The Trumas hadashan, excuse me. V'sidar ma'aruchais. Okay, Kolomar al pisha b'parsha zeh, Ze ein ikar oidus hakarvas hatamid. Talking about you have to bring the offerings. Things got to move quickly. Ki im aldereg ba'avodas hashlim fneizer shehim begeder kasher the gravas hatamid. The offerings, the continuous offerings, have to be done in a speedily fashion. Hari b'hakasher b'hakasher b'chis ba'ifrin shal zrivos ein zav el lashon zeros. So he's talking about first of all, that our karbanos and our connection to Hashem and our service of God must be in a way of quickly. In other words, we have to move with alacrity. You ever see, watch the Rebbe walking? He's not like, moseying along. You got to move. You got to move quickly. I feel like the camera's skipping. And that's in our service of Hashem. Time is valuable. And at the same idea, we also see the service of us here to one another and the importance of moving quickly, like when it comes to giving tzedakah, how important it is that we shouldn't tarry, we should not kind of. So when needs something, boom, we should run to help them in the best way possible. Okay. And it says, Gadola tzedaka mekroivus has geula ad ki yavo shilo. And that the greatness of tzedakah, it brings close and it hastens the redemption until, says, yavo shilo. Shilo will come. Not my son, Baruch Hashem, he came 12 years ago, but Shiloh is one of the names of Mashiach. Yud Beis, Amasehu Iker, and the main thing is the action. Yesh l'siyim v'hashlim as Hamasiyanu v'rasim, as we find ourselves at the end of the completion of our deeds and our service. Klo gama kasher v'hadrisha ad mas, including the demanding of ad mas at Hashem. The Kuriza Yechia Melech, and including the proclamation of Yechia Melech, the king lives. David Malcha Mashiach, the seed of David Melech, Mashiach. This Riza is Hakiyudar Kasher im Mashiach, im Simcha v'chayos, and his bringing about speedily is connected together with our joy and our life force. Got to be excited for Mashiach. Like, speedily in our days, be Maravi, Amenu. No, it's doesn't work that way. You got to move, chaparine, fast. The Haikaim Shana in the Sir shall cover the Gershon, I'm not see the rain. Sha'id is a boiling Makuviocho, Achishna, the Chazrizos at a quarter Boroloki, Kechem Kahin Hu, Kohanim's Rizos, the Goa Esbaneso, the Rizos Hakido, Turk of Mead Mamish, the Kwan can find that Meshach will come in a blink of an eye. And we have to do everything possible to hasten his coming, including by proclaiming his kingship, by saying Yechia Melech. Excuse me, no, sorry, let me finish the paragraph. The Kivan Shikavar Evra Esrim Shana, Shibhem Chatzisa Etzak for him. The Frierdiker Rebbe at one point said that all that is left is to polish the buttons, right? It's known like when, in the military, when you finish getting completely dressed, your final step is to polish up the buttons. And the Rebbe said, for sure, we've already polished up the buttons because we've already passed that time. Okay, we already said that for sure. The Rebbe said the buttons can be over polished. In other words, everything's done. There's nothing, and this is was said in Mem Ches 1988. Just to give you an idea, we're talking about 37 years ago. מכיוון שכן הרי ודאי שעכשיו צריכה להיות מכריעה כביכול חזרי של הקדוש ברוך הוא להביא עשר גאולה ותכן ממש. And the Rebbe said, how much more so, when the Frierdiker Rebbe said this already 40 years ago, that Hashem needs to immediately bring Geula right now. Techel me'ad mamish, immediately. Kiyami mitzivah zois hatoras. Ha'ola, he ha'ola al makoidem al hamizbeach, kal halayla, talking about the karbanos, ba'a ilah ha'koin etzem, ba'boiker, bis ha'migdash shlishi. I'm sure those mikdash adonai kana yedecha, that God will establish with his own hands. Benenech kodesh baruch hu, Hashem will build it. Bana u'mishchalo. Galal Yoval mean Hashemayim, that says that the third base of Migdash is already built, it will descend from heaven. Yechol Yirad Lizgalus Lamata Afilo Balayla Zem Mamish. And there's an opinion that said Mashiach can't come at night because something connected to the Karbanos can't be done at night and it'll happen immediately. The Rebbe said no, it could happen anytime. It could happen even at night, and it should happen tonight, the Rebbe said. In a way that we should literally open our eyes, our physical eyes, the shamas begufin, souls in our bodies. Klalim gam nitas lechem lev levasar, and God will give us a heart of flesh, lev chadash v'ruach chadash, with a new heart and a new spirit. Yud gim. Correct. Yoin nisyam nitenas leshlichos mitzvah letzedakah. And the Rebbe says, first order of business, increase in giving tzedakah. Starting today, take upon yourself to give more tzedakah. The ear sheyesh lamar tchilas v'siyum hayoyim be'inyan hatzedakah. Yar b'dugmas tchilam v'siyum hayoyim b'karaban hatamid. V'orech Allah ha'olam. Or thus tamid hu hagdim. Allah, talking about the different offerings. Haboiker v'shalem hakol harabanus kulam mekan shelo yad davar muchar. As Hamid shall ben harabin, but dugmas bazahi to feel lois b'makoyim tamidin takanun tefillah shacharit keneged tamid shachar tefillat mincha. That right now we don't have korbanos, so each one of the three prayers, shachar, mincha, and marv, are connected to the different offerings that would take place in the base of Mikdash. V'hi ratzon be God's will. Shaklata al derek nitinas tzedakah tevi techav ar haschar. That when you take upon good resolutions to give more tzedakah, you immediately get the reward of that. Because tzedakah brings the redemption closer. David Malcham Mashiach through Mashiach himself. But Pashtus, in a simple way, and he says, here he is, Mashiach is coming. He will redeem us. All of us together. Including all the Jewish people. Our young and our old, our sons and our daughters. But especially in this year, Shanat Hakel was a Hakel year. Hakahal em ha'am ha'anashim nashim v'tafa. Hakel year, all the nation is gathered together. Kol gadol yeshua haneh kol gam hadoros lefana hakivit. All those from before, and they will the righteous will arise from the dust. But prat v'zechosan shel nasim sedikasena b'avaray Asher alpi amavora b'ksvei harisa for the reino zeh. Who the it says according to the teachings of the Rizal and Shar HaGugulim, that our generation is a reincarnation of all those Jews that went out of Egypt. Including in the merit of the righteous women. And the Rebbe says in the merit of the righteous women, maybe for putting up with all of us, the redemption will come again. And just like the day I took you out of Egypt, I will show you wonders. And all this will happen in the most simplest sense. The true and complete redemption happening right now. Hashem will bless you and bless all of Am Yisrael to appoint Melech HaMashiach upon us, to awaken the King and the redemption within us, and we should have true redemption and be in the Beis HaMikdash this Pesach for the actual carbon offering. Pesach offering. Wow, that's going to be tasty roasted meat. God bless you, Moshiach Now.